If you're a website designer who's been thinking about starting a podcast as a way to advance your credibility and your marketing, then you have come to the right place. It is not enough just to think, I'm going to do it as part of my marketing plan. I will just rattle off whatever occurs to me at the time. As a website designer who has done exactly that, audio is not created equal. And been podcasting for nearly 2 years now, I have everything in this episode that I am going to walk you through, how to do it and what to expect from it. Don't just use Zoom and think, oh, I'll crib from this. Hi, I'm Holly Christie. I'm from Websites Made Simple. I am a website designer and a website designer's mentor. I also mentor developers. And I am here to help you have an absolutely amazing career in website design. So let's get started. The very first thing when setting up a podcast, or actually before you even set it up, is thinking about the strategy. And trust me, it is not enough just to think, I'm going to do it as part of my marketing plan. I will just rattle off whatever occurs to me at the time, put it out in the world, and everyone's going to love it. Trust me, as someone who tried that, it doesn't work. So before you get started, before you think about it, get working with a podcast producer. Whether you decide to go for the whole shebang or whether you decide just to get some strategy and advice, I really advise it as money well spent. And when looking at the strategy, you want to look at who is it for? What do your listeners want to hear? And what are the long or short-term goals of your podcast? So starting with who it's for, if you're working in the web design space, it could be that you're looking to share website knowledge. It could be design knowledge. It could be technical knowledge. It could be that you want people to work on the strategy of their websites. I know a few website designers who have moved into that recently. Whatever it is, get really clear on what it is you're going to be putting out there, because that's going to shape what you name the podcast and the episodes. It's going to shape the content that's there as well. And it's ultimately going to inform you of who your ideal listener is and how best you can work with them. And I think this stage, as I say, I would absolutely recommend you work with a podcast consultant or producer on this, because a lot of the time we are too close to our own businesses. And it can be really hard between knowing what we think our listeners want or our audience wants and actually knowing what listeners do want, because podcasting is a really different medium to chucking up a post on LinkedIn or Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or wherever you are. And it's very different to blogging on your own website as well. So really do get clear, make that the number one thing you do. And then the second thing you need to look at is production and who is going to produce it. And I think that we can often think, well, because we're techies who work in a techie space, we've got this. You know, we know how to use the software. We could be using the recording software anyway. And off we go with it, record the podcast and off we go. Audio is not created equal. And something that you really need to bear in mind with this as well is that lots of your listeners are going to be listening with no visuals. You can do video podcasts as well. This one goes out as a video as well as audio, but we still focus wholly on the audio because a lot of the listeners are listening when they don't have visuals. So they don't have a frame of reference. All they know is how good the quality of the recording sounds. So you really need to think what's going to make your audio stand out. And here is where I would really recommend that you get a podcast producer. And if you don't know any podcast producers, I am more than happy to introduce you to mine, who is Neil Valio from Podnose Podcasting. He took my podcast from a homemade, not doing very well affair to something that I'm really proud to put out in the world and something that sounds great. And you're listening to this, so you probably think he's doing a great job as well. And I will ask him, who writes my show notes, to put his contact information in the show notes. So the next thing is tech. Just like with websites, where we have our websites have to be hosted, the podcasts need to be hosted as well. And there are a few different podcast hosting platforms out there. I'm not going to tell you which ones to use and which ones I use. If you particularly want to know, you can get in touch at hello@websitesmadesimple.co.uk. But I don't really want to influence you. Use the tech that works for you. But just bear in mind that you will have to have it hosted. There will be a hosting fee. Please do not just go with the Spotify creators hosting thing. I have heard all sorts of people have all sorts of issues with it. Do use a proper host. And with recording as well, you'll also need the recording software. And again, I'm not going to tell you which ones to use, but what I will tell you is don't just use Zoom and think, oh, I'll crib from this, particularly if you are releasing it yourself. And you can go out there and find some podcasts where people have recorded over Zoom and you can really, really hear the difference. And it's not good, especially when it's an audio only one as well. So when it comes to recording, the main advice that Neil always gives me is get to the point. Your recording should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you also want to encourage your listeners to engage with it in some way. And that could be asking them to write in and asking their opinion on something. It could be that you're looking at giving them a download and say you want to share the address for the download. But make sure your podcast is concise. This is not a place where you just want to have a long ramble of thoughts or tell stories that are happening to you. By all means, tell the story, but make sure that they have a real relevance to what it is you're putting out there, because listeners will drop off as well. So you can have this many listeners downloaded the episode, but what you're really looking for is for people to stay all the way through the episode. In the same way that with websites, we're looking to have a really low bounce rate on a website, and we put a lot of work into making sure that that's the case. Well, you need to do that with your podcast as well. You need to make sure that listeners are not bouncing. So make it really easy for them to stay engaged, and do that by being concise. Advertising. Now, this isn't strictly in the production side of it, but I think it's a really important part, because as a web designer, I often get people saying to me, I'm going to start a podcast. I'd like you to do the podcast page or a podcast website or something like that. And then they will say that essentially they want the podcast to be a medium where they can get a lot of downloads and they can then advertise and make money off the back of the podcast. That strategy, it kind of feels old-fashioned these days. I mean, people still do it. But when I first started listening to podcasts, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, something like that, there were a lot of big names who went out and did their podcasts. And the main kind of strategy around it was to get, in the same way we have advertising blocks on websites, to have these blocks of advertisers on their podcasts. And it worked for a while. And I've checked out some of those podcasts these days, and they are getting really low ratings now because people are saying there's just too much advertising in them. And the adverts aren't necessarily always relevant. And again, listeners drop off. If you've got a really loyal listener, they will just forward the adverts, but don't put them in that situation in the first place. It is your podcast. It is your opportunity to share what you're doing and your work. And you don't want to dilute that by having random adverts that you have absolutely no control over advertised on your podcast. Saying that, you can advertise your own stuff on your podcast. And I believe that you absolutely should as well. If you listen to my episodes, you will hear ad rolls within the episodes for what I'm launching or what I'm doing, or sign up to my newsletter or whatever else. And again, it's looking at having that engaged listener who wants to work with me, who wants to become part of this plan where I'm using podcast for marketing as well. So when you are doing your podcast, do bear in mind, what would you like people to engage with? And it's not really like a like and follow, leave a review sort of thing. And then once your podcast has built up, you can look at getting sponsorship for it. And that's where you'll be talking to people who pay you a set amount of money, and the sponsorship will be much more relevant to your audience and it'll be much more effective. But let's get your podcast off the ground first. I want to talk to you about the marketing and timescales and what looks realistic with this as well. Because as web designers, we are used to things usually taking a little while to get traction. For example, when you submit a website to Google Search Control and you need to wait for it to index everything, and then it's got to make sure that everything's doing what it's meant to, that the images are the right sizes, that your clickable elements aren't too close together, that your page is loading quickly, that everything's doing what it's meant to do. And this is the same with a podcast. And don't be surprised if in the early days, you don't get a huge amount of downloads. That's just normal. You might not know this. I certainly didn't know this, but podcast SEO is a thing. And in the same way that you would take professional SEO advice for your website, again, I really recommend that you have SEO advice for your podcast as well, because there is nothing more soul destroying than putting all the work into the podcast and then looking at your 29 downloads a week stats as well. It is possible to get your podcast some really, really, really good results. But in the same way that homemade websites don't make money, homemade podcasts don't get you clients either. So really do get advice. And if you've already got a podcast up and running, maybe look at having a podcast audit. And if you haven't, that is the absolute best time to do it, because you get to start off on the right foot with it as well. And finally, just get started. I know it seems a lot, but then so is building websites. When you think about it, we send people off daily and we say to them, you just need to send me your images, your branding, your website copy, your keyword data, your info, whatever it is you ask for with the website build. And, sometimes clients stall and they're like, I can't get all that. And they just need that hand-holding with it. But ultimately, they do get started. And it's for you to get started with this as well, because podcasting is just getting bigger and bigger. It's not going away anytime soon. And the sooner you get started, the sooner you can have it as a really reliable part of your marketing kit as well. So that's all from me this week. If you are thinking of starting a podcast for your web design business, I would love to hear it. So do get in touch. You can find me at hello@websitesmadesimple.co.uk. You can find me on LinkedIn at Holly C. Christie. And let me know how you're doing. Until next time, happy web designing.